Save the media, save the planet. Media has been a battlefield for influence on climate issues for decades now.
A new United Nations report raised the threat of climate change to a whole new level.
Longer, hotter, drier droughts, and it will only get worse.
The world is ill prepared for what is to come.
Without action, there could be irreversible damage.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
It's not climate change. It's called winter.
India's hottest on record.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Climate
changes. Climate change.
It plays a significant role in shaping public opinions, but also the political debates and decisions. Its impact on public policies and public debates can be observed in various ways: information dissemination, agenda setting, political polarization, public awareness and engagement, framing of climate skepticism, and the way climate change is portrayed in the media has a significant impact on mainly two things, in my opinion: public policies and public perceptions, and the battle to control the narrative is actually ruthless. In this essay, my main goal is to break down for you the actual media depiction of the climate change debate, the media misconceptions, and the numerous inaccuracies. Then we will also talk about the whole notion of skepticism and the actual impact it has in our real lives and climate change policy. And as usual, we will think about ways we can combat and mitigate the effect of climate skepticism and denial. It's important to start by noting that reporting on climate change is challenging by nature. Indeed, in one of my past essays, I tried to demonstrate all of the discrepancies that exist between scientific findings and media headlines. So in itself, the representation of scientific findings are sometimes skewed. And here is a little extra. A study found that nearly half the scientific studies reported in the news contain exaggerated claims or misinterpretation of the research findings, according to Vox in 2017. The distortion of information can create a skewed perception of scientific knowledge among the public, leading to misunderstandings and false beliefs. Timothy Caulfield coined the term science-ploitation, used mainly to point out where newsworthy scientific advances are exploited by marketers with unproven claims. The term is also used by Professor Caulfield to debunk some of the most pernicious falsehood and explore the cultural forces driving the rise and spread of health misinformation, including celebrity culture, social media, predatory journals, and the spinning of real science and sciencey language. Confirmation bias, a cognitive bias where individuals seek out and interpret information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs, also contribute to the exploitation of scientific research for media headlines. It is also very important to me to put it as a disclaimer that there is no debate on the realness of climate change. This is not the conversation that we are trying to have, and the basis is that climate change, human-caused climate change, is real. So much so that all the skepticism debates have stressed out the scientists to the point where they even released research to reconfirm the consensus on the scientific consensus. I kid you not, there is a study called Consensus on Consensus, which is a synthesis consensus about human-caused global warming. I'm telling you, in 2016, according to 6 independent studies by co-authors of this paper, they concluded that the previous finding of 97% consensus within the scientific community that basically humans are causing the recent global warming effects is robust and consistent with other surveys of climate scientists and peer-reviewed studies. So in this essay, the only question that we should really asking ourselves is, what the hell are we doing and how fast? Period. I will start by defining what I call media inaccuracies and how the media is misrepresenting climate change facts and scientific proofs. So I think the most important thing that really struck me is that actually one of the most prominent inaccuracies come from one of the pillars of journalistic ethics: balance as bias. As you may know, when you work in media, one of the key principles is to actually present a fair and balanced opinion. And when you do so and you invite experts, most journalists try to seek out of their own knowledge to go and find expert and give equal room to different perspective so that we can have an informed opinion. Now, in the case of climate change, that approach is actually creating the bias. Indeed, in Global Environmental Change, published in 2004, the piece Balance as Bias, Global Warming and the US Prestige Press, written by Maxwell and 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗗𝗨𝗖𝗧𝗦, demonstrated that US Prestige Press coverage of global warming from 1988 to 2002 has contributed to significant divergence of popular discourse from scientific discourse. Through content analysis of US Prestige Press, meaning the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, this paper focuses on the norm of balanced reporting and how it leads to biased coverage of both human contributions to global warming and resultant action. These press outlets have done this by offering a countervailing denial discourse, a voluble minority view that argues either that global warming is not scientifically provable or that it is not a serious issue, roughly equal space to air their suppositions. And climate change skeptics have fueled the debate of existence of anthropogenic contributions to global warming, which basically means human-caused contributions to global warming, by emphasizing uncertainty, often to inspire inaction. This has further contributed to biased coverage and public discourse on the issue. Also note that most of the skeptics are not just skeptical people that are questioning if climate change is real or not. They are generally funded by industries who have a very important vested interest in slowing down policies that will protect the environment. So corporate industry lobby groups and industry executives such as the Global Climate Coalition, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, or Exxon have heavily influenced the position of the United States government on environmental issues, prioritizing the threat of environmental policy on the current economic system. Please peep their name. Global Climate Coalition? Really? Talk about confusing people and rebranding yourself. So basically that study showed that because those prestige and top media were actually trying to give a fair and balanced view on the topic, they gave a more prevalent view on the 3%. Basically. And most importantly, they gave a bigger view to lobbyists and people who are actually prioritizing the capitalistic and economical interest over the well-being of us all. A second interesting point in the essence of why media has been reporting about climate change like that is actually in the act of juggling reporting on uncertainty and risk. James Pinto worked on the journalistic depiction of uncertainty about climate change in 2016. He says that media research has focused on the uncertainties of climate change, both as dominant discourse in the media treatment and as the presence of skepticism in political discourse and media coverage. Challenges to mainstream climate science are common in Anglophone countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, but not so common in other Western nations. The reasons for this difference are not well understood, but it has been proven that they tend to challenge climate science a little bit more. And a little caveat to that research is that I will definitely say that although they say that the reasons are yet to be understood, we previously mentioned that the lobbying and the funding of disinformation is also one of the main causes of that issue. The revolution in news consumption through new players and platform has created a fragmented media landscape, and there are gaps in understanding where, why, and how skepticism appear. The paper highlights the need to study how new media players depict uncertainties about climate science and how their emphasis on visual content affects audiences' understanding of climate change. I think that the different paths to explore in that particular point of new media, including the different forms of media, the podcast, the social media, the individual media, people from traditional media also now have their own brands through social media, podcasts, etc., create new avenues to disseminate skepticism. And I think that capitalism and commercialism is also really affecting those media to the point where it affects their reporting. In the paper titled The Commercial Misrepresentation of Environmental Issues, Comparing Environmental Media Coverage in the First World and in Developing Nation, two researchers from the Amity University in Rajasthan mentioned that in the past 4 decades, influenced by the market values and ongoing monopolization of media ownership, business interests played a key role and resulted in drastic change in the representation of environmental issues in the global media, along with an emphasis on entertainment values at the expense of reasoned and informed coverage. However, some third media practitioners offers environmental news coverage that is informed by sustainable forms of developmentalism while recognizing environmental issues as being both local and global phenomena. Then we can talk about media skepticism. And I think that this is the key and core issue, at least in the 4 past decades, regarding climate, in my opinion, is that the skepticism was never actually factual. It never came from the scientific community or the general public as a whole. It was purely manufactured propaganda to serve the interest of a few huge conglomerates in particular industries and lobbyists that need to keep those industries alive, literally by any means necessary. Last year, I briefly wrote about it on my LinkedIn account, and I really recommend that you not only look at that post, but that you read the article that is linked and that I'm now showing on screen. But also please take time to watch the documentary Big All vs. the Word. I think it's one of the most brilliant case study, although evil, but it's a brilliant case study to help you understand how public relations and media experts can actually completely flip the narrative upside its head. And in that particular case, they manufactured for the oil industry. They created think pieces. They did an excellent job at creating thought leadership pieces that they then pitched to the media to create doubt and skepticism about climate change. All through, they knew it was a lie. But the people at the other side of it, the recipient of those think pieces, were not aware. And these creatives in the early 90s, what we are now enduring as the climate change skepticism, denial, and everything that comes with it. And as it's been proven several times that particular groups have vested interest in invading the media space to convince us and create doubts about climate change to serve their own interests. Here are a few strategies that we can list so that you are able to pinpoint and recognize them. Number 1 is manufacturing doubt about the scientific consensus on climate change. They may fund studies, experts, organizations that present alternative viewpoints, often exaggerating uncertainties in climate science. Number 2, selective reporting of some media outlet, downplaying the severity of focusing on dissenting voices rather than the overwhelming scientific consensus. Number 3, framing it as a political issue to polarize the public and policymaker, hindering bipartisan support for climate policies. Number 4, emphasizing economic concerns. Industries that could be negatively impacted by climate policies may emphasize potential economic drawbacks, job losses, or increased costs associated with transitioning to a low-carbon economy. This framing aims to sway public opinion against aggressive climate action. Number 5, lobbying and political contribution to campaigns. This can influence the policy agenda and decision-making process, slowing down or weakening climate-related legislation. And number 6, funding think tanks and research institute to produce reports and studies that align with their interests. These reports may downplay the urgency of climate action or question the effectiveness of proposed solutions. Several investigations and reports have actually proven those strategies that I just mentioned. One of the biggest cases is one of ExxonMobil denial. In 2007, the Union of Concerned Scientists published a report titled Smoke, Mirror, and Hot Air: How ExxonMobil used big tobacco's tactics to manufacture uncertainty on climate science. Inside Climate News conducted a series of investigation reports in 2015, revealing that ExxonMobil had known about the risk of climate change as early as the 1970s, but funded climate denial campaigns and sowed doubt about climate science. The investigation suggested that ExxonMobil used tactics similar to those employed by the tobacco industry to cast doubt on the scientific consensus on climate change. This prompted further investigation by attorneys general in several states. Those are also related in the documentary Big Oil vs. the World. The Merchant of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway in 2010 explores how a small group of scientists with connection to conservative think tanks and industries created doubt about scientific issues, including climate change. There's also a documentary film adapted from the book and launched in 2014, further highlighting how certain interest groups use the media to create confusion and delay policy action on climate change. Those very think tanks were also the subject of a study published by the journal Global Environmental Change, where Dunlap and McCreight in 2010 investigated the role of conservative think tank in promoting climate skepticism. The research identified a network of conservative think tanks that received funding from fossil fuel interests and played a key role in promoting climate skepticism through media outreach, publication, and policy advocacy. We can also mention what is called dark money in climate politics. In 2019 and 2022, the Influence Map published their report titled Big Oil's Real Agenda on Climate Change to describe the influence of major oil companies on climate policies and the use of dark money to fund climate-related political activities. Influence Map is also a nonprofit think tank providing objective and evidence-based analysis of how companies and financial institutions are impacting the climate and biodiversity crisis. The findings of those reports highlight how those companies, despite publicly expressing support for climate action, have been actively working behind the scenes to undermine or slow down efforts to address climate change. The findings were actually astonishing. Extensive analysis finds that the 5 supermajors, namely BP, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and TotalEnergies, are spending hundreds of millions of dollars each year on a systematic strategy to portray themselves as positive and proactive on the climate change emergency. This is found to be absolutely inconsistent with the company's plan to capital investment in their businesses. It is also found to be misaligned from the detailed policy engagement activities of the companies and their industry associations on climate change. Across 3,421 items of public communication materials from the 5 companies in 2021, 60% contain at least one green claim, while 23% content claims of promoting oil and gas. Claims highlighting the company's support or involvement with efforts to transition the energy mix were by far the most popular type of green claim. In contrast, only 12% of the 5 companies' 2022 capital expenditure is forecasted to be dedicated to low carbon activities. You can clearly see the discrepancies here. Additionally, none of the supermajor forecasted oil production appears in line with the International Energy Agency net zero emission by 2050, with several companies planning to increase oil and gas production between 2021 and 2026. And at the same time, Influence Map found that none of the companies have aligned their climate policy engagement activities with the goals of the Paris Agreement and retain a very dense and global network of industry associations globally, which are highly active in their opposition to Paris climate change policies. In summary, they are clearly lying through their teeth, and we are just keeping up with the charade. And to make matters worse, as we previously alluded, contrarians may have more visibility. A research article in Nature Communication published in 2019 juxtaposed 386 prominent contrarians with 386 expert scientists by tracking their digital footprints across approximately 200,000 research publications and 100,000 English language digital and print media articles on climate change. Their goal was quantifying the disparities in media visibility and scientific authority and identifying organizational patterns within their association networks. Here, They show via direct comparison that contrarians are featured in 49 more media articles than scientists. But yet, when comparing visibility in what is called mainstream credible media sources only, we observe just 1% excess visibility, which is already too much in my opinion, which objectively demonstrate the crowding out of professional mainstream sources by the proliferation of new media sources, many of which contribute to the production and consumption of climate change disinformation at scale. These results demonstrate why climate scientists should increasingly exert their authority in scientific and public discourse, and why professional journalists and editors should adjust their disproportionate attention given to contrarian. If we want to decipher this a little bit, there's two things that are important here to remember. Is that as a whole in the media space, if we talk about quantity, contrarian are actually grabbing 49% more space than expert scientists. They have more articles than them. But in that particular regard, we're not really talking about the quality of the articles and the mainstream media who actually have the credibility and more bulk of the audiences. But then they still manage contrarians to have 1% more of visibility than expert scientists in mainstream media, which again means that they are kind of neck to neck and they even surpass them. But again, the expert scientists consensus, as we mentioned before, is overwhelmingly more important than the contrarians that are supposed to not even by any stretch of the imagination reach 10% of the scientific consensus. So they should never even have 51% of the media space. It's insane. It makes zero sense. And I think that we should really pay attention to when we watch the media, because there is a true imbalance. That's why we always have to question what are the facts and what is the science actually saying, because the media space is actually overcrowded with contrarians, although they don't really have any basis for debate. In this essay and in general, when I talk about media, and although it's very difficult nowadays to separate the different and multiple sources of media that we have, I typically talk about traditional media, which can be TV, newspapers, magazines, and their social media accounts. But I'm not talking about user-generated social media, for example, where you and I can give our opinion and we are not journalists. Those traditional media can also have new forms, so it can be podcasts or YouTube videos. But again, here we are talking about what I call traditional media and journalistic work. So in the margin of that, you always have to keep in mind what is happening on social media, which is a separate conversation. And you also have in the media the advertising part. I generally don't discuss advertising because it goes without saying that those are paid placements. But I thought I could also share a study about greenwashing in advertising to show you how invasive the propaganda can be. Lauren Baum, on December 12, 2012, published in Environmental Communication, a journal of nature and culture, released a constant analysis of environmental claims in magazine advertisements from the United States and the United Kingdom. A total of 247 environmental advertisements were analyzed from 84 issues of mainstream magazines from the US and the UK. 3/4, 75% of the ads analyzed contain one or more aspects of greenwashing. For those who don't know what greenwashing is, basically it's claiming to have sustainable green elements in your products, basically to sell more. And generally we talk about greenwashing when those are false claims. It's a way of riding the wave of sustainability, climate change, climate awareness, and all the good stuff in order to serve your capitalistic interest and sell more products. Firms advertising in the US magazines were significantly more likely to employ misleading, deceptive environmental claims than the UK firms and magazines. In the US magazines, 3/4, 75% of environmental advertisement contained one or more misleading, deceptive claim, with only about half of the environmental advertisement in the UK magazines containing misleading or deceptive claims. The scene of vagueness occurred most frequently in about 57% of all ads, followed by lesser of two evils claims, 34%, and hidden trade-off claims. So I think it's very important to look at that information and continue to be very, very, very attentive of what we consume, because the claims are not always true, especially when it comes to advertisements. How to counteract all these climate change skepticism that is proliferating in the media and basically our funded propaganda campaign to disseminate doubts and slow down climate action. I think in that particular case, scientific, climate, and media literacy all together is the best way to go. When you combine all of them together, it can empower citizens to actually know what's right, what's wrong, and decipher the fallacies in the media. In March 2011, Karen B. Cooper wrote a paper called Media Literacy is a Key Strategy Toward Improving Public Acceptance of Climate Change Science. It was published in the American Institute of Biological Sciences. She asserts in a finding that in order to be climate change literate, the public must first be media literate. She also suggests that a new strategy to improve public acceptance of climate change science should include the following components: expansion of education beyond science centers and museum to radio, television, and movie entertainment, as well as the blogosphere; creation of live and virtual forums and events that facilitate discourse for mutual learning; avoidance of deficit perspective; inclusion of critical thinking and reasoning skill in education, not just hypothesis testing; and additional means to provide the public with tools for critical analysis of media. And last but not least, additional means to help scientists and science educators become media savvy. That is actually our second solution. We need more communication training for scientists and more collaboration between media and scientists. In that particular case, climate scientists. They need appropriate training to learn how to communicate effectively their findings to the media and the public, and they also need to learn how to create clear and understandable, palatable communication for everyday people. And the more accessible it is, the more it can actually counter misinformation. The collaboration between media and scientists must be facilitated in ways that make the information reported in the media accurate and relatable, but also nuanced and layered so that it's not oversimplified either. This can definitely bridge more of the gap between climate research and the general public. There are also a lot of fact-checking initiatives, and they can serve the media, of course, but they are also very useful to us as consumer, as we can go and actually fact check everything that we read every day on the media. We don't have to take it for granted. They play a crucial role in correcting misleading information and giving us the actual accurate information. Here are a few reliable ones that I will also put in the link in the description so you can go and test them and start using them for whatever you need. They're actually not specifically related to climate, and they are meant to be used for general information. I also put the link to one very interesting source, which is Report Lab. I love that particular one because it's actually an aggregation of different fact checkers all across the globe. As you can see on the map, it's a collective initiative, fact checkers all over the globe, so you can find information and fact check close to home and also abroad and get a little bit more sense of accuracy depending on the topic and the region. Of course, we can always encourage responsible journalism. Journalists have to make the effort to curb their bias and ensure ethical reporting. Journalistic integrity is crucial to maintaining public interest and public trust in the media. There are a lot of resources available that media can actually use, because it's very important to say that there's a broad and vast array of media. You have the huge media houses, but you also have a lot of independent scientific, regional, or national media that can use some resources to make sure that they are up to date and they are up to the task of informing the general public in an accurate manner. For example, UNESCO has developed the resource Media and Information Literacy in Journalism, a handbook for journalists and journalist educator. This tool offers guidelines for the development of internal policies and strategies aim at the systemic promotion of media literacy, related training institutions, and digital communications platforms. I think also as consumers, we always have to highlight the scientific consensus and promote positive narratives. I will always talk about that 97% of consensus on human-caused global warming, because it's very important for us to understand how overwhelmingly important the consensus is amongst the scientist community. This is the base of our debates, so it shouldn't be the norm that we discuss skepticism and is climate change real so much in the media today. And of course, it goes without saying that we should also engage activists and thought leaders in the public debate so that they can give this informed and decisive opinions, but also engage their own large audiences. Last but not least, I also and always want to mention legislation and regulation. We all need to make sure that in our respective jurisdiction, advocates for responsible media spaces and journalism. And in doing so, we address misinformation and promote responsible media practices. Some countries in the world have already implemented legislation towards the press. But beware, between 2011 and 2022, 78 countries passed laws designed to limit the spread of false or misleading information on social media. However, many focus on the content itself, criminalizing the creation or distribution of fake news. As a result, many misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation laws chill press freedom rather than enhance it. In many countries, countering false information is framed as an issue of national security, and in authoritarian states, this can pose a real threat to independent media. So as you can see, there's a real fine line here between promoting fair journalism and making sure we promote facts in the media and repressing freedom of press. So I really encourage each and every one of us to really take a look at these matters, because it goes without saying that it has impacted our lives directly, and climate change is absolutely nothing to joke with. So I think that it is a multi-layered debate that requires all of our involvements. And to counter climate skepticism, fallacies, misinformation, it requires an effort on all parts, from legislation to us calling truth to power in the media and debunking those fallacies when we see them. We have to kick fake news to the curb, but first and foremost, we also have the power to recognize it when we see it and call it out. We have to foster informed public discourse rooted in science, and the science is unequivocal. We have to call truth to power in the media. We have to require more legislation that will counter all the lobbying and all the false information that is freely disseminated in the media. All of this is our collective responsibility, because, to be honest, the powers that be benefit from it mainly in a monetary way. So we need to create incentive for them to stop false narrative and use the media as a weapon against the best interest of the planet. And it is possible to counteract the influence of misinformation and contribute to a more informed and engaged public for the greater good of our planet. If you enjoyed this video, I am so grateful you stuck around and will be delighted to read a comment from you. You can of course like and subscribe. The entire list of articles, research papers, and references is available in the bibliography linked in the description below, as well as other key details you might like to get access to. See you very soon in another essay as we continue to decipher media impact and strategies together.